As Tara has our agenda up before us on the screen, what we're going to want to get into today is some of the cross-cutting issues and reviewing the conclusions portion of the report. So very similar to what we did at our last meeting for the intro, which I think everybody found very beneficial to have that kind of discussion as a team and what we wanted to have included in the plan. I think we'll do the same for now these cross-cutting issues and the conclusion section of the plan in order to help lay out what we want there. So covering those on the agenda, get into our upcoming meetings and the schedule, and then discuss next steps as we move forward, depending on our time that we have available yet today. So a lot ahead of us still. If you have not already done so, please get your sections turned in to Wes and Tara. We really need to start pulling the draft of the report together. And then part of what OWR will be doing is kind of that editing, if you will, so that the report has one voice and is similar in its format and in its voice and the way that it's presented, so that we can get that back out to the task force and your individual sections and teams to look over and make sure that we haven't taken away from the content or the meat of what you're trying to deliver there. Just kind of as a reminder, it's easy for us to want to dive deep into some of that. So just remember, though, on the plan, we're spotlighting the issues and we're making recommendations. And then as the task force, as we move forward together as a task force, that's when we would dive in deeper on some of these recommendations or that might result in some white papers being prepared by your sections and your teams on some of these issues and recommendations. And so just keep that in mind as we're putting together the plan, that all those white papers don't have to be part of this plan necessarily, but the plan becomes the launch pad for a lot of that great work. So keep that in mind, but we need to get all those sections turned in whatever form they're in, so that we can begin to pull all that together into our final updated report that we can then move forward with. So with that, thanks for your participation today, and I'm going to turn it over to Wes and Tara to take us into the first cross-cutting issues. I don't know that we need to do introductions. We can see who's on by the participants list to kind of see who's on the phone this morning. Again, thanks for joining in. And Tara and Wes, if we could get into cross-cutting issues, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I'll actually turn it directly over to Tara. I think she's been working diligently on the cross-cutting topics along with some help from Laura Kiefer. So I think they had some information they're wanting to share there, and also just give an update on, Tara, if you would also just mention about what we've received to date and maybe a good starting point, as Lauren alluded to, and what we may still be missing from some of the sections out there.
All right, thanks, Wes. What I brought up on the screen right now is the email I sent about a couple weeks ago. And just a reminder, like Lauren and Wes said, that the sections are due, and I'll go over the list in a minute of which ones I've received, just so you can make sure that we've received your latest. But then we also had a couple other items that we talked about last month. And one of those was for you guys to send me your cross-cutting issues and topics, and how they related to the other topics. So that's going to really help us develop that cross-cutting issues and recommendations. So I'm just pulling up this email to remind you. And then for those that have not submitted, here was just a reminder of what goes in the table. And one thing I noticed that some people were still using the wrong, incorrect table, and I'll bring up the version that we as a group had decided on. And if you have not submitted your table in your final section in that manner, I would ask that you go ahead and revisit that and just send us that table with all these proper, these different categories in those columns. And then just as a reminder, we did request if anyone had any photos to send those along with the attributes. I did receive a few, and then we also mentioned last month when we talked about the introduction that if you had any interesting water facts, to send those our way to be included in the introduction. And another thing that came up last month was just to revisit the 1984 report. And if you could let Wes know, in one of his sections, he's talking about some of those issues that have been resolved. So if there's been anything since the 1984 that's been resolved or ongoing, and then also if there are any new and emerging issues since the 84 report, send those as a list so that Wes can get those included in the introduction. And then the last part of that was just looking if there were any policy or federal law changes since the 1984 report that we can mention that would impact the entire topic. So I started a table just to keep track as to who sent what and when. So that's why I bring this forward. We're doing great. We've got 10 of the final sections. So we're just missing 3 of those topics. And then I did have a table here that I'm tracking all those other things that I requested. So like I said, we've done a great job sending the final sections, but if you could send me some of these other issues, and even if you don't have any of these particular categories to send me, just send me an email, me and Wes an email saying that you've got nothing to add, just so I know that you're done with those particular items. So before I move on, are there any questions on what we were looking for from last month?
Terry, just a statement. Would it be beneficial to send out just one last email reminder that may have like the format of the table and also this list, just to send out the group so they know what all we're looking for as a reminder?
Yeah, no problem. And I was going to bring up the table format real quick to remind the group what the table finally was. We just had the 3 columns, the lead agency, the funding, and the action. And some people were bringing forward one that had a few more columns that we had decided that might make the table more complicated. But I will send out this example section. I'm going to use Wes's as the golden ticket. But if you have any questions, just reach out to me. But this is the final table, and like I said, this is the table that I'm tracking. And as we move forward today, I might add more columns if we come up with other things that we might need for the conclusion or for the rest of the report.
Tara, this is Beaker with IDOT. Excuse my ignorance on this, but would you explain again what you're really looking for when you talk about the cross-cutting issues? Is it just issues that affect, like, for example, mine's navigation? Is it just other potential issues that are affecting other topics? I guess I'm a little unclear as to what I'm supposed to provide on that.
Well, that's a perfect segue into what I was going to present next. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shut the participants. This is evolving. So originally, I'm actually going to bring up the table of contents. At one point, we talked about that sometimes our issues are cross-cutting across the different topics. For example, there might be one in climate change talking about future rainfall. And then in the flood damage, I actually talk about that too. So that the future rainfall impacts the issues for both of those topics. So that would have been a cross-cutting issue. And then when I get to the bottom here, we talked about that sometimes we had cross-cutting recommendations. And that would be where I had a recommendation that was very similar, or you had the same recommendation that another group might have for a similar issue. But in talking with Wes and some other people within the committees, I'm not sure it's going to be maybe a little too complicated to talk about cross-cutting issues separate from the recommendations. So I'm going to open it up to the group, but what I had started, and we're going to go forward and evolve. But BJ, to answer your question, it was specifically for the recommendations, is if your recommendation really affected or impacted or was similar to another topic. So the idea was at the end, we had talked about putting together some sort of spider web type graphics to show that a lot of these issues and recommendations were similar, and we wanted to illustrate that. So the first step was to just make a table of all the recommendations and list what topics were cross-cutting. So what I was originally asking each topic leader was to send what they thought that their particular recommendations cross-cut with a different topic. And so I hope I'm answering your question, but then as I started developing this table, I realized that there were some other cross-cutting type categories that we might want to discuss in the report, but this might be peripheral. But which of the recommendations affected social environmental justice? We all know that in Lauren's group, they have in the integrated water management, they're talking about the IWIC or the Integrated Water Information Center. That's the final word that we, or the acronym that we came up with, IWIC. And that was an area where we're going to deposit all the information from all these different water groups. And we could talk again about that if people aren't remembering what he recommended, but it was going to be a portal or a place where all the water information from all these different topics is housed, and a place for the public and for the communities to go to find information. So, and then as also part of the integrated, we talked about having more local assistance to a lot of the communities, which also helped the social equity. So I was starting to track some of that as well. But the main thing that I wanted from you guys, and for instance, this is an example for water quality. This is all their recommendations. And then if they thought that it overlapped with a different category or topic, that's what I'm looking for. And so what I've started this table, we're not going to put this table in the report. It's way too big and too complicated. But the idea is to utilize this to generate some of our graphics to show where they cross-cut and overlap. So I have taken all the recommendations I've received to date for all the different categories or for all the topics, and I'm just waiting to hear back from you guys as to what you feel that your recommendations cross-cut with some of the other topics. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up to further discussion or further questions as to where we want to go with this, because it's still at the very infancy stages of where we want to go, and I'm totally open to suggestions.
This is Lauren. I'll start. And BJ, one area that's an easy start is probably your section. Probably includes education of some sort. I think all of the 13 topic areas have, touched on the need for education, and so that's one area where in education it seems like it's mentioned in about every one of our topics, and so that outreach and education becomes kind of cross-cutting if that helps define some of what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think I have a better understanding of what you're looking for and such. So yes, thank you.
Hey, Tara, I'm wondering if looking at this table could really be helpful for everybody to see, and wondering if maybe periodically, or at least, after this meeting, sending a version of this table out for people to look at, and then they could input what they think directly on the table, because they could see everybody else's recommendations and the issues and all in one spot, and then they could send, their version, of the spreadsheet back. And that way you can maybe copy paste or something like that. But I think it's just really advantageous this will be probably the first time all of us will see everything all together in this type of format. And it might be helpful, because then we could see things that maybe we hadn't seen before.
That's a great idea, Laura. And what I will say, I just took all the ones I received to date, so there are some gaps if I haven't received it. So I might, I'll go ahead and send this out, but as I receive the 3 that were missing, I will resend those. And just to say, water quality, this was my attempt to do yours. So I did not receive your comments, but I was just trying to play around with it and see how I would fill this table out. So I do need you to review this particular section. This was just my guess, and I was trying to use it as an example. So this is as far as I got, but please revise. But that's a great idea, Laura. Does anyone else have any? And I guess I would say, are there any other columns as you're reviewing this and you have some recommendations that really seem to have some consistent recommendations that might overlap with others? Let me know if that's something we should be tracking. I'd be glad to add another column as we go forward. And again, this is iterative and we're going to have other opportunities to review it, but yeah, I appreciate that, Laura. You're right that this helps everybody see everybody's recommendations to date in one place. So any other comments? All right, the only other thing I would add is if you've done any other types of reports like this and you've seen or read other reports that show these overlapping visual, if anyone wants to send us examples, we'd be glad to look at those and to use as guidance, because there's a lot of information here and it's going to be hard to summarize it in a clear way. So any recommendations or help is definitely requested. So Wes, I'll go ahead and moving on our agenda to go ahead and open up the conclusions, but go ahead and send us any questions as you go forward with your anything about the cross-cutting. So go ahead, Wes.
Yep, thanks, Tara. And so we'll jump right in the conclusions. And Tara, if you have the table of contents open up, I just kind of wanted to go show a brief overview of the table of contents, where this is all falling. So you see the table of contents, we have the introduction, the cross-cutting topics, and talking a little bit about social and environmental justice. Then we get into those 13 topics of the main body of the report. And then shortly thereafter, we go over the cross-cutting again, or we're talking about maybe pulling out that introduction that's to be worked on. But we move into the conclusion section, as you see here. So just to give you an idea of where this is all coming in and how it's coming together with the table of contents. So we'll skip back to that conclusion section and go into that first topic within the conclusions, I guess, would be the summary. So it looks like Tara has laid out a couple of dot points here that she's going to hit on in the summary. So Tara, do you want to kind of go over your initial thoughts of what you're going to include in this portion of the conclusion?
Sure, it's tricky because, you know, we're writing the conclusions before we've seen everything put together. But in general, it's just going to be a quick summary of what we've found in the report, and just a quick address. We have a lot of pages of introduction, and I just want to refresh the reader with what the goals of the purpose, and then some of the main water challenges. But at the end of the day, it's just going to be talking about a summary of these, and we did talk even in the introductions. It's going to be challenging to list all the recommendations. We just have to decide the best way to present it, because I think at the end of the day, we probably have about 100 different recommendations, and that's going to be sort of boring just to look at a list, but we'll figure it out. That's partly where all those cross-cutting ideas will be discussed, and that will actually be in the chapter right before this. So this might just be a summary of some of those that we've developed in the previous chapter. But this one really can't be written until the end. So there's not much really to say. We're just going to summarize some of those issues and summarize some of those recommendations in the manner that might make the most sense. So go ahead, Wes. Or
Yeah,
does
I think
any other input?
Yeah, I guess I did have a comment that I think it's really important in this section to hit that review of the purpose and how this report and these recommendations are moving that purpose forward and kind of bring Illinois into the new era, I guess, of water planning. So, and moving the state forward. So I guess I just wanted to hit that home in that conclusion, you know, as we stated the purpose of the report, we really want to mention on how that has been accomplished in this summary.
This is Lauren. I guess one thought, you know, when we a few years ago now, when we worked on the urban flood awareness report in conjunction with State Water Survey, one of the ways, you know, the way that we did the recommendations in that report was kind of by responsibility. And so it was kind of recommendations focused at, say, the General Assembly, recommendations focused at state agencies, recommendations focused at local governments, and maybe even recommendations focused at, you know, stakeholder non-for-profits. So that was another way we could consider the recommendations, was kind of by who is this recommendation aimed at.
Lauren, are you suggesting doing that for all the report's recommendations or just some general highlights?
I'm throwing it out there as, do we want to consider presenting our recommendations in that fashion? I mean, we've got it right now. It looks like we're thinking about doing them by topic area, but I'm wondering about, I've found it useful in that urban flood awareness report where the recommendations are kind of by who's expected to act on this recommendation, and grouping them that way kind of, it breaks it, you know, if we have 100 of them, it provides a nice way to kind of break them up. But then it's also, if you're, you know, an entity looking at it from the General Assembly or from local government, you could see, right, well, here's what we're looking to you to help do.
Hey, Lauren, I like that idea, and I'm familiar with that report, and I think it was very useful in the urban report. But I remember thinking to myself when I read that it didn't really apply here because all of our recommendations are for the General Assembly. In the big scheme of things, everything is for the General Assembly to act on. So I think I like the idea of still dividing them by topics because the whole report will be in that manner, and then people can look for their topic of interest without having to leaf through all of those. But I'm not opposed to, since this is a summary, of presenting it slightly different if that was to help make things clear.
Good morning, this is Chris. What if we presented it one way in the actual report and then had an extra appendix that separated it by who's responsible for it? And that way, if you're an agency and you're trying to figure out what you've committed to, you've got two different places you could look. You could look by topic or you could look by your own name.
Essentially, that would be resorting the recommendation table by lead agency instead of by topic, correct?
Yes, as an appendix, yes. Although that would take away my excuse for not recognizing that I had something that I was responsible for if I had a list that was under my agency. Just saying.
As long as we don't call out specific individuals.
We needed a separate appendices just for Chris.
I go by bottleneck, Chris, now, just so you know.
I like that idea, Chris. I think it makes sense. And maybe that's even makes sense to what Lauren was saying before. Who's responsible? I think that is very important for the different agencies and it might help the whole group to see what agency is really bearing the brunt of this. We might have to renegotiate who's responsible. All right, any other input into the summary? And again, a lot of this might fall out as we move forward, and we may want to readdress this once we've got all the pieces. It might naturally occur, or we might need to rethink it.
Hey, thanks, Tara. I guess I will move on to the prioritization that we had listed in here as the conclusion. I think the thought of putting this in is, since we'll be having, nearly 100 recommendations over the 13 different topics, this would kind of help identify where the largest needs are, what the biggest interest is from the public or the state agencies on what to move forward with. Tara kind of assisted in maybe putting together a matrix for identifying how we determine those priorities. And you can see those listed here, talking about public health and social justice and climate change and other concerns. There's also the question of, do we take into consideration the vote weighting that we initially did as we identified these critical topics and putting those into consideration. As I look at this a little bit more, I guess I'm throwing to the group. I was talking with Tara prior to the meeting about maybe just taking this out. I think it may send a mixed message that we're going to work on our top priorities first. And since we have multiple lead agencies, I wonder how that would be really put into place. You could almost have a prioritization based on lead agency, but even in some cases, such as OWR, we have multiple people working on multiple topics, so that would even be difficult to claim that you're working on your first priority over others. The other, I guess, thought I have on this is, since we're not identifying dollar amounts within any of these initiatives, it would be difficult for us to define what the priority is, if we had a set funding amount, since we can't identify what those fundings are. So I guess I want to throw it out to the group to see everybody's thoughts on if we should be identifying the prioritization of these recommendations. It kind of almost pits topic against topic, and I don't know if that's the message we're trying to send here as well. So again, I just wanted to take a moment and see what everybody else's thought is. I was almost debating taking this portion of the conclusion out and not have a prioritization section. So I'll open it up for any thoughts on this, as this is kind of, could see a fairly lengthy debate on whether or not this should be included or not.
Hey, Wes, this is Laura. I understand the conflict. I'm trying to figure out, and I don't have examples, but wondering, maybe not prioritization may not be the right word in that. If there's, it seems we've all been working towards maybe, a set of goals of what are we striving for, and and then putting together the recommendations, and they would come from multiple recommendations to achieve that goal. And the only prioritization would be is that, there is a domino effect. What recommendation has to happen before the next one can be done? And the hard part is that, we were looking at these as 5-year goals, So, do we have, obviously I think we all could probably come up with longer term goals of which these are the recommendations that would get us closer to completing them. But I'm kind of rambling, but it was just kind of an idea. But I think the root of my idea was just that some of these recommendations may have to come in order, not so much as a priority, just one can't happen unless the other one occurs first, or and identifying those things so that there's not this shotgun scatter approach that at least, we've identified some of these areas that, we have 1, 2, 3, that there's a particular order that's required. Not, it's not exactly a gelled idea, but just something that came to my mind.
So you're recommending more of a prerequisite list almost for certain recommendations rather than a prioritization?
Yeah, something like that. But I think with the sense of, well, why, what is it that these recommendations are moving towards? What's trying to be addressed? And that would help give people some kind of order. That's going to require a lot of thinking, but I kind of agree, though putting just a straight prioritizing, would, especially with agency programmatic burdens already, it seems to me that would require director level um, viewpoints and getting into that quagmire. So I can see why you guys have had a lot of deep discussion.
Yeah, this is Chris. What I kind of wonder about is if we left out the actual list of prioritization, but left a section in there talking about the need for prioritization and what things should be considered, but that because everything is so interconnected and that funding sources may appear in areas that are, like Laura's saying, might actually be trying to fund something out of sequence, that it makes more sense that communications happen with the agencies as we're trying to move this whole effort forward, and not to commit to something today, but say we're ready to prioritize if and when opportunities present themselves or something.
I like that, Chris.
Too, I think it's difficult when a study is to go out as far as this one will. The priorities may change over time and as you complete certain things. So by looking at it today, if you write a prioritization list, again, in 5 years or 7 years, it may totally be different. So by putting some kind of qualification on it, like Chris said, I think that would be good.
And if the local or if the chapter itself had identified its own priority, then, we recognize that. But again, there may be an opportunity that funds show up to fund one thing, that if we're looking at this plan well and we see that it can help with 2 other chapters things, we pick them up because it's already there and available. So we're going to piecemeal parts of it, but again, it does make sense that we also want to stop somebody from spending money on something that's step number 4 of a 6-step process if the first 3 steps have not been, engaged yet.
So that's, Chris, that seems too that maybe is having to identify, and that's more than what this group can do, but that there seems to be a need for a policy mechanism by which each agency consults the water plan before they decide what they're going to be addressing under their own programmatic needs, that don't, botch up the order of things. It has to be within the circle of decision making within each agency, which means that requires maybe something more of a formal mechanism that obviously is above and beyond all our pay grades, but, or at least, like you were saying, at least, if they would take a look at here's what we think are the ways to approach prioritization, and, see what you can do. It just seems to require a communication at a much higher level, maybe, I don't know.
I see this almost be as a continued coordination, maybe within the State Water Plan Task Force as funding becomes available to take on new initiatives. That's coordinated with the task force to see if there's, not only the direct benefit of that funding, but also secondary benefits as we look at multiple recommendations. As a result, I don't know if we should have a prioritization section in itself on this conclusion, but maybe elaborate on how the State Water Plan Task Force will continue to collaborate and include that funding initiative in that description. I'm trying to think through it.
Yeah, that's
Lauren,
great, Wes. I like that.
Yeah, I was going to add in that kind of plays in well to the integrated water management section, wherein we're trying to more formalize some authorities and responsibilities of the State Water Plan Task Force itself, that we serve as that body for that multi-agency collaboration and some of that decisions and directions and sharing. So that, similar to what we've been talking about, that fits in well with the integrated water management perspective of the report.
So Lauren, would we want to talk about that somewhere here in the conclusion, as kind of focusing on future communication? I know it'll be covered in your section, but I'm looking at some of these other topics that we're going to be talking about within the conclusion. Do we want to add that into the summary, or it wouldn't necessarily be under the General Assembly next steps? It could be under the measuring success paragraph or section that we're going to be covering next. Just trying to figure out where we want to put that.
Yeah, I think some of that, it's kind of both, right? Some of the prioritization and measuring success, it kind of all fits together as the task force itself does its work to kind of figure out what we're moving forward on when.
So maybe I'll take out the prioritization section and maybe incorporate measuring success, and talk about collaboration, and I kind of get into that as well in that measuring success section. So maybe that's a good place to put it.
I think let's start it there and see how it shapes up.
Sounds good. Any other comments on this prioritization? Right now we're talking about taking it out and kind of moving it into measuring success. Any other final comments? Okay, hearing none, I will go on ahead on to the measuring success. So in here, you can see a couple of dot points I had. I think it mentions each committee to develop budgets, work, tasks, timelines associated with each recommendation. So essentially, I see this almost as a promise to develop future annual update reports, and that's kind of mentioned by the fifth dot point down there, to publish annual status reports. That was actually done with the old report. I think it was a great benefit to show what has been accomplished in the State Water Plan Task Force still moving forward. So I kind of recommend that within the measuring success, and that's how we would go about doing it. Again, making sure we have those budgets, timelines kind of associated. I think there's a lot of opportunity to develop these white papers or more detailed reports to hone in on some of the details. I guess this is why within those recommendations that we want to make sure that they're measurable so that we can note when they have been completed and that it's not a general concept. So again, that's something that we'll be looking at as we do our final review, and why it's important is because we want to be able to note when those have been accomplished or when significant milestones have been reached. Again, we'd recommend that committees for each of these topics continue to meet, and while we have a lead agency that's ultimately responsible for it, we recommend, so this third dot point is talking about the committees still meeting to implement these recommendations. The fourth dot point, we talk about the priority to continue to meet quarterly as the task force to give updates. This is where I think we can bring in that communication of available funding and opportunities, and just give updates to what we're doing. So once the report has been published, this task force, instead of meeting to talk about what should be in the plan, is talking about what has been accomplished in the plan. So again, that would lead to maybe an annual report. And then we would also continue to provide an update on what's going on with the state water plan, maybe talking about when we'd start to develop a new state water plan. We'd also be talking about, it kind of talks about, sorry, I'm skipping around a little bit, the updates to the website and putting new information out there. So that we can have information readily available, and they're not waiting for the next plan that it's either going to occur 5 to 10 years from now, but when new information comes out, they have a source available to find that new information. So that was the intent, is to continue to carry this initiative forward after the report's done, give updates on it, and share that with the public. And that's what I intended for the measuring success portion of this conclusion. I guess I'll open it up to any recommendations or thoughts on how we want to measure our success with this report and implementation.
This is Lauren. I'll start with I guess maybe a question for the group. When we're talking about, publishing or putting out kind of a status, an annual status report, are we better off doing that at the end of the calendar year or at the end of the fiscal year? I know it seems like at the end of the calendar year, you're always kind of doing reports for the governor's office or something, but is there a time of the year where it makes sense to do that, or we have more availability to get that done because we're doing other summaries on other times of the year? I throw that out there as a question for the group, I guess.
And Lauren, I'll throw out the possibility of maybe doing it in the end of the first quarter of the calendar year or the third quarter of the fiscal year. Would that be a good time to, I know for us, that's when we put together maybe some funding requests for the following year. Just another thought or time period of when to consider if we'd be asking for that about this time each year, so we could put together funding requests.
I think I like Wes's idea about like this time of year, March, or well, you'd have to do it by March before you could get funding requests in. But what year would we be reporting on? Would be anything that's been accomplished by the end of the, like, let's say in this example, the end of 2021, we would be reporting on it about now in 2022, or what would be the cutoff for such a status report? Did it really matter?
I don't know that it matters. I think as long as we've covered, a previous 12 months, but I think it is good to think about being strategic. Yeah, at what point do we do we cut it off at the end of the calendar year and have a report ready by this time of the year in the spring, or do we do it by fiscal year and have it ready for to fit in with a budget cycle in the fall? Those are the questions running through my mind in terms of when is it most advantageous to report.
This is Chris. It seems like it would make sense to report on a fiscal year timeline so that if we are trying to support additional budget requests or things, we've got it there. But having said that, I don't know when the best time is to actually have a report completed.
I think my mind goes to getting in with a budget cycle, and so I think we'd want a report out kind of at the beginning of the budget cycle for the next fiscal year. So we can do some checking with the fiscal folks to see, from their scheduled timeline, when would it make sense to introduce new requests from a funding standpoint based on what was completed and what's next.
So I guess that could be another ask for the task force, is for each agency to reach out to their fiscal officer or equivalent to find out when it would be most advantageous to have a report available for that request.
This is Chris. I'm going to ask to have IEPA excused from trying to research that question, since the majority of our funding is not coming from general revenue. We'll defer to the agencies and organizations that are getting general revenue funds, because I think that's the more important target that we're trying to hit.
Agreed.
So Tara, can we just track and whenever we send out a summary email of what we're asking for the each of the leads, just add ideal funding request timeline or something along those lines?
Will do.
Are there any other ways that we want to measure success? Does everybody like the idea of doing an annual update, which means, we finally get across the finish line and we start the next race of getting stuff done and looking at publishing annual reports on this. Any thoughts on that? Is it going to be worthwhile?
I think it probably doesn't need to be exhaustive, because obviously nobody's looking for, a lot more work. We could probably agree on a format of how, things to report on, some of the recommendations. And obviously, some of them are going to be dependent on whether funding was even attained. So a lot of stuff will be sort of, not started or something, applying for funds here or something like that. So these could be fairly short and sweet, or if there's something's been going on, maybe a page or two or something of updates. So as long as it's not, onerous, annual updates are nicer, and then too, it has to be readable and people be able to understand what's going on. So keeping it simple, just kind of like we've tried to keep the state water plan simple as best. So I like the idea of annual reports, just because it's, things move slowly. So there probably, won't be that much to report every year. It'll be incremental at that point. but it keeps everybody honest. It keeps the momentum going.
Yeah,
Yeah, Laura, I think. Go ahead.
do we have a visual like a speedometer, or a United Way thermometer kind of a thing, or a trend line or something? Is there and we could discuss that more, I guess, when we got to having to put together our first report, but having a quick visual by topic area or by recommendation, is it sitting on zero, or and maybe you have kind of a red, yellow, green, where, oh yeah, we're making great strides, or this is still stuck because of lack of funding.
Yeah, I think any, infographic of some kind is always easier for people to grab onto and then would dive into anything that was written.
I'll vote for that, but instead of red, yellow, and green, how about we do colors of pretty water in Illinois, that we start with brown for bad and work our way up to lovely blue for good.
Everybody likes blue water.
I like that, Chris. One thing I may have thrown Wes for a loop here when I had added a couple bullets up here, but when you talk about, this whole measurability of each recommendation, each one is very different. So I don't know, I sort of saw it as when Lauren gets funding for the task force to meet through the integrated management, we actually get funding and we talk about some of these success goals for each recommendation. I think are there any that are global across the whole state water plan that would be an easy measurement? So I struggle with this one a little bit because I don't think any of us know the specifics for each recommendation, because obviously if it's a one-time funding and it's a report, that's easy to measure. But some of these longer term, or if a law gets passed, that's easy to measure. But I was just curious, thinking out loud, if there's any specific goals that we can go across the board for the whole success of the state water plan. But I think that now that I'm saying it out loud, I think it's probably impossible.
Nothing is impossible. It just might not be cost effective. I would say, let's plan on something annual, and we can dig a little bit deeper into what and how we're going to do some of the stuff. We don't have to tell anybody exactly how we're going to measure success, other than the fact that we are. And then maybe we could, as we see things starting to happen or not happening, we can figure out how we best want to present this. Because it may end up that we put it on one of the agency websites as a dashboard and just capture it that way, and maybe it's not even any narrative. Well, little narrative.
I think we're looking at doing that, and that becomes a good point. Do we need a paper PDF, or do we just put it out on our state water plan task force website so that they can find updates all in one place, and anything pertaining to the state water plan, it's all in one location? I'm all for going away from paper. Paper reports, more reporting. If we can just update a website, I think that'd be my preference. Or does anybody see the need or benefit of having an official PDF report?
Maybe once we see what we have to report, we can determine if a paper follow-up version is appropriate. Because again, there might be something where all of a sudden we're seeing opportunities at the federal level to bring money into the state, and we've got things recommended in the task force or by the task force that haven't moved. Maybe a paper report summarizing what's happened and where we need additional guidance going in a paper format would help guide our legislators to where we want them to go. Or maybe we get the whole thing put together and it looks good as a dashboard on the DNR website, and we just refer them to say, hey, here's what's going on.
Another thing is we could just update with each meeting as we give status updates. We could essentially update that dashboard, and it's effectively always current up to the last 3 months.
Yeah, that would keep it from being too deadline-ish. But then, you know, we do self-impose a deadline just to make sure it's the odds and ends are updated. Also, I like Chris's idea, but at the same level too, you know, the folks in the General Assembly like, you know, 1 or 2 pagers to know what they need to be working on, and so that material could be drawn off of the website, and folks that can champion something to the General Assembly can then create small fact sheets or something from that material. So the website could be the source of whatever paper might be needed in order to take advantage of some opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Laura. If we can just kind of simplify it by pulling the data from one source and putting together a fact sheet or a summary sheet, I'd be in favor of that. I'd also probably propose that we have a current estimation of completion, or when we anticipate getting to that task. So we talked about making sure that we have them done in order, so we may have to account for that as we lay that out. But if somebody's wondering when recommendation number 19 is going to complete, they'll see it's not going to be done until 2026 instead of 2023. Any other comments or thoughts on the measuring success section here? Any other thoughts? Otherwise, I think that gives us quite a bit of guidance on what should be included there. I'll pause a moment, and then Lauren, if you want to give an overview on the General Assembly section and what you were thinking for that portion.
Yeah, and again, I like the idea of maybe as we get into the report being on the website and a usable website, that we can generate these kinds of next steps on a regular basis at the right time for the General Assembly, depending on what we're trying to do. In this first update, I think it really was kind of that, number one, to make them aware, a reminder that we have a state water plan, and then number two, kind of that, and here is why it matters to the General Assembly and what we're asking of the General Assembly. And maybe this even kind of gets into just setting up an ongoing process, like we've already been talking about, as the State Water Plan Task Force convenes and carries out our work to implement these plans. Just that awareness and then specific direction. So maybe within the plan, we're kind of explaining how they would continue to use the plan.
Lauren, is there any legislative acts or policy that actually formalizes the existence of the State Water Plan, or the State Water Plan Task Force as an official entity, as functioning in the state? I'm kind of wondering if not, having that more formalized. I mean, there's the Rivers of Illinois Coordinating Council is an act by the General Assembly. Because I think that having that formality of its existence and what it does, may be more powerful. I don't know.
Well, and I think that's kind of what, I'd have to look back at my own section, but I think that's kind of what's recommended there, is that formal establishment, because I believe it's been kind of executive order that's brought the task force to be in the past. And so, like, as we've discussed, creating it more as a officially recognized body, and then providing that funding support to allow the agencies to carry out that collaboration and coordination and implementation work. So yes, I guess to your question.
So I'm wondering if that might be a recommendation overall for the state water plan is the formalization, not just executive order of, or unless you feel the executive order is enough.
No, I think that's actually in the recommendation, is more of the legislation to formalize it beyond an executive order.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to see what other dot points were there.
Hey, Lauren, this is Yufeng.
Yes.
Based on what Dora you just say about the more input or more support, more recognition from legislator, and I was thinking about the session before when we talk about measuring success. Is there any way we can put a language that I don't remember during the survey, do we have any suggestion from legislators says we would like to see this happen based on this plan, and then as a measure of success? Well, what I'm trying to say is a metrics, index, or some kind of the measure, and it was suggested by legislator, and we put that in that session, and then somehow we give the credit of the legislator individual or as a group, say this is what they suggest, we would like to put that in our measuring success. So there would be more direct link, and then to kind of set up the more dialogue for the future on the General Assembly for the next step. So am I just mumbling myself, or and just a quick thought pop into my mind on this. Thank you. Try to connect on the previous section and then what you and Roy just said here. Thank you.
Well, I can definitely see where we need to establish kind of that link between success brought about by the General Assembly and the need for the General Assembly to continue to resource and create additional successes and recommendations. And so I can see the tie there.
Oh, are we saying that maybe in the measuring success session, we need to put something in regards to success within the General Assembly? Or would we keep that in the General Assembly section?
Yeah, this is, I don't think what I said was very organized because it's just fresh in my mind here. So what I'm trying to say is earlier when we talk about measuring success, and the discussion was making very important on how we really state and then provide a measurement on how those project or those idea and those action carried, and as a measurement of that. And then in those lists, what we put here is any of them was specific asked by the legislator on what we have here. And if it is, maybe during the write-up, we can give a credit of the specific legislator, say, hey, we put this in our measurement because of this legislator or General Assembly mentioned this. And then I'm not talking about put that in this to do this here, but I'm talking about to emphasize that in the detailed write-up. And then that could be a good segue to connect into our next steps with General Assembly.
Are you talking about like identifying champions, like that?
Yeah, and not in a very direct way of that.
Yeah.
But it could be a segue of doing that. And yeah, Lauren, that's what I really mean on that. But identify champion based on the champion got to be already involved during this process. So maybe in the survey and during your interaction with the legislator and who has been involved and then who has made suggestions, and that's make that statement more vocal in other sections, in the previous sections, and then try to connect into the General Assembly.
Okay.
So it shows like General Assembly, and legislature, they are very clear about this. Which we know they are, and then but we put it in really in the writing and during the measuring success. See that this is one of very important measurement of the success, and actually was suggested by this legislator, this group of the legislator of that. Thanks.
Yeah, in my mind, I think it's because each agency has our own relationships, and those legislators that we used to champion individual legislative proposals and so forth. But I think it would be very beneficial as each of the agencies do that, and it ties into what we've recommended or what we're trying to do under the plan, kind of the mention of back to the plan, so as recommended in the state water plan, wanting to do X, Y, or Z, and then there is those individual kind of champions have something to back that up, right? Or as came out of the state water plan, I'm advocating this and that, and then all the General Assembly members would start to recognize that these different pushes, if you will, these different actions stemming from a unified plan. I think that gives them some greater assurance and gives it more weight.
Lauren, I think just say, that's why I make that's exactly why I make that recommendation here. And then also might tie up the dots together, which might have some outcome and end up is more bipartisan than we think. Because as you say, our different agencies might have different, champions, and then this could be the opportunity to connect dots together and make the dots become a net of that. And then how a lot of issues might be even more bipartisan than we think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Forrest.
Lauren, is there anything else you have on General Assembly, or are we ready to move on to the next point?
I don't know if we can scroll down to make sure I haven't missed anything. Um, no, I think I'm good for now.
Okay, any last final comments on the General Assembly section? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the final section of the conclusion, is the website and plan updates. And again, this kind of ties in a little bit with the measuring success, so I think there'll be some balance work on my part trying to evaluate what goes in where, but again, making sure we conduct these annual status reports, whether there be snapshots of the dashboard. Again, we'd want to, I think the big thing that we want to do differently with this plan from the previous is making sure the plan is dynamic, updatable, and easy for the public to find information. So I think that's why the second bullet point is so important, to make sure that we link pertinent information. I know there's a lot of uses of GIS web maps and maybe providing it in there. I think this will be maybe where we kind of coordinate or link to the IWIC once that's established with the integrated water management section. And then also just provide new information out there, pertinent information. Make sure we have our status updates out on that website as well. So I think that would really become the hub of what's going on and what's been accomplished, is through that State Water Plan Task Force website, as far as getting the latest and greatest information on where we are as a task force. And from there, that can stem off and provide links to information pertaining to the 13 critical topics. There is some discussion about providing multiple languages for the website, so we'll kind of investigate that opportunity and see what kind of resources we have to develop that. And then also providing a potential public feedback forum or portal to provide comments, so we can continue to have correspondents come in to provide feedback on that. I guess, is there any other thoughts on what should be included with this plan and website? I guess one thing that we should really discuss about finalizing is when we would want to have the next plan update. Is this something we've heard 5 years, 10 years, we're going to update these plans? Lauren, is that something we want to solidify in this report, or does anybody else have any thoughts on giving ourselves the ultimatum that we're going to update this plan again in a certain time frame?
I think, and maybe it's in the integrated water section, water management section, but I think that, like, this update has a 5-year focus. And so whether, when it needs to be updated, but I think we stick with a 5-year focus of activities, which suggests perhaps a refocus, maybe, at least in the next 5 years, but by defining the focus of this update, that kind of then suggests when the next one should be.
Yeah, Lauren, I agree that, as I look at the effort that we undertook for this one and when we started, this is obviously at least a 3-year process that we've gone through, and likely it probably wouldn't be as long to do the next one. But I could see maybe with the goal of publishing an official report every 10 years as we focus on implementing for 5 years, and then having 3 or years or so to develop the next one.
Yeah, so I guess my suggestion is we don't necessarily put a year, we're going to update this every, 5 or 7 years, but by saying, the focus of this one is over this next 5-year period, it kind of the unwritten assumption is that it will then, there'll have to be an update in that next 5 to 7 year period or something.
Does that sound good with everybody, that we just emphasize the focus of 5 years for the implementation phase? And that would essentially, trying to think of the word, assume that an update would come after that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Okay, we'll proceed with that. Is there any other information or data that we should be listing on this state water plan website? I think we'll continue to put our calendar out there on when we intend to meet. We'll kind of provide links to data that was discussed in the water plan. Is there anything else that should be included in the website? Okay, hearing none, I think that wraps up the discussion on the website and plan updates. And Tara, can we go to the table of contents that views the conclusion once again? And now that we've kind of gone over these individually, I just wanted to maybe take a moment to see if there's anything in the conclusion that should be added, that is worth discussing within the conclusion that we may not have thought of. We could probably also do the same thing for the appendices. I think, Tara, we mentioned about adding an appendice for the recommendations sorted by agency lead. But I wanted to open it up to the task force to see if there's anything that you think should be added to the either anything following the topics, I guess. We have the cross cuttings that list at number 20, anything that could be included in the conclusions of 21, or anything that should be added to the appendices in 22. I just wanted to see what anybody's opinions were, give a chance to discuss if there's anything that needs to be added or even removed.
This is Lauren. I guess my mind goes to how we do continued outreach, right? And so there in the appendices, we have public outreach summary. Is that how we did what we did? How do we set up how stakeholders can continue to feed into the task force?
I think the public outreach summary was going to be where we kind of collected those comments, what feedback we got during the public outreach. I think that was the intent. If we want, I'd almost say future outreach, that would almost be in the website plan and updates where we talked about receiving that feedback portal.
Yeah, I think I'd
Or,
call it like continued outreach.
okay. But we won't have there, I guess, is there intention to have a formal public outreach session like the 3 that we are intending with this plan, or is that just something that's more generic?
I envision something more generic and kind of a almost like a how to engage portion.
Should we list that in the appendices or list that in some of the conclusion? Do we pull that out as a separate conclusion point?
I think a conclusion point.
So maybe that provide public feedback portal and response will actually be taken out of the website and plan updates, but moved to its own section. So we can kind of emphasize that and show that in the table of contents. We think that's a big enough issue to list separately.
I think so.
Yeah, I agree with that. Any other thoughts or comments on the conclusion or the ending portion of the report? Okay, not hearing anything. I guess we will wrap up our discussion on the conclusions and go back to the agenda where we're going to be talking next about the public meeting. I think we're still intending to shoot for sometime in June for that public outreach meeting. Lauren, do we want to dive into what that looks like at this point, or do we want to hold that off for maybe the May meeting?
I think it probably would be, yeah, maybe good for a focused discussion in May. I know my June is almost full already. I'm trying to figure out, we do want to press ahead there. I think we had talked about that from a scheduling standpoint, but I guess I would envision something similar to the outreach that we've done already. And then I think we talked about maybe having one of them at least in person, but certainly the virtual participation capability over like 3 different periods.
I guess, is this going to be more like the first outreach? I mean, is this going to be, do we need each of the project or each of the topic leads to put together something for that outreach, or is it going to be more of a generic, here's the report, and maybe go over the format and what's in it and not do as big of a deep dive into the 13 topics?
I don't know. I'm interested in what the group has to say about that, I guess, first.
Could you repeat that, Wes?
Yeah, so with the next public outreach effort, it was a discussion of, or I guess the question posed to the group was, do we want to have each of the 13 topic leads prepare something for that outreach session, or do we want to keep it more generic of, here's the report, here's the layout, formatting, and just go over the report more in general terms instead of doing a deep dive into the 13 topics like we've done in the first two outreaches.
Well, we did kind of go into a deep dive on problems and issues and recommendations already.
Yeah, Laura, I was thinking that myself, so I'm not sure what we would say that hasn't been said before, unless if it's just revising based on feedback. But I kind of lend myself a little bit to this being more of a generic public outreach. But again, we wanted to see what other people thought as well.
And I think everybody, the leads on the top on each of the issues, need to be available in case there are specific questions. But
agreed. I think we're going to provide the maybe pre-final draft is what will go out, right, for comments. And so any of those parties that want to do a deep dive, they can do that on their own, and they can certainly provide us questions or concerns as the feedback to that outreach. But I think more of the generic, here's what we've accomplished, here's what it is, here's where it's at, here's how to use it, and here's where we're going with it. I think that probably is our better messaging for this final one, rather than somebody getting into, issue number, recommendation number 3 of topic number 7, right? So they certainly are welcome to do that in their response comments to us, but I think it's more of, okay, here's where we're at. We've given you, you can make those comments, and here's how we're going forward from this and how to use this report and website. I think that's probably our better serve for the outreach there.
Is everybody in agreement with that, or any other thoughts about what should be included in that public outreach session?
Yeah, because I think I'd want it to springboard how the stakeholders could use, their state water plan task force, right? Kind of just as we were just discussing, how do you engage, and how is the task force going to continue to work and implement going forward, and how do we set up those lines of communication and continued engagement? I think that's going to serve us the best.
I just had one comment. You mentioned, I know in the past we've talked about doing it virtually, and one of our biggest maybe criticisms was not reaching out in person, obviously because of the pandemic. But you mentioned just having one in person, and I guess I would maybe question that at this stage. Maybe we should have 3 in person at the 3 locations in the state, like we originally planned. They could be simultaneously virtual, but I feel like we should reach out to as many different populations as we can. I'm just throwing that out there.
I'm certainly open to that as we try to make ourselves available, or show that we've tried to do our best to reach everybody in an inclusive way.
I guess I'll play devil's advocate here and say that, because the nature of this is going to be, here's our report for you to look at and provide comments, I don't know if we're going to get as much direct feedback on the day of the public outreach, but more of, here it is, here's how to look through it, here's how to use it. Now go take a look and see if you agree with it and provide your comments. I don't think we'll get as much interaction on the day of the public outreach, but I see receiving a lot more feedback after or during that public comment period. I think everybody's getting so used to virtual meetings now, it's not as much of an issue to do a virtual versus a in-person meeting. I think the mindset of people have kind of changed on the need to have those in-person meetings. But that's just my thoughts. I guess I'll also add that if we're talking about doing this in June, there's a lot of vacations and plans made, a lot of scheduling conflicts. I see trying to hold 3 public meetings are maybe a little difficult. And if we're wanting the topic leads to participate as much as possible, that also adds to some continued difficulty in scheduling.
Is it possible to maybe get the draft document, posted, give it time to be circulated in like June or July, and then I don't know, well, I guess it's redundant because then I agreed with Wes in that we probably wouldn't be getting too much feedback. We would just be better just describing the document itself, because I was thinking of then having maybe the second half of August for um, the public meetings. Yeah, I guess that wasn't helpful. Sorry.
What does it, I
That
guess,
convinced me that I'm okay. I just was trying to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that we're showing an effort to inclusively, to include everyone, because not everyone, one of the complaints is not everyone is a virtual attendee to these types of things. But that said, I agree what we're presenting doesn't necessarily lend itself that well to an in-person public meeting. So I'm in agreement with what Wes said lately.
are we better off kind of having this outreach that launches the pre-final draft and how to use it and how the website or how the State Water Plan Task Force is going forward, and then set, a review period that just ends, at some particular date, right? Please provide your comments by X. Or do we put it out there, say, here it is, and you've got the next, 2 months to review it, and then we'll wrap things up with an outreach, what did you have to say? I guess my preference would be more of the first, that here it is, here's what we put together, here's how we're going forward, and then just, you're welcome to continue to submit written comments and concerns up until, July 15th or whatever.
Yeah, Lauren, I'd lead towards the first is here's our report, here's how to utilize it or what to kind of an overview of it, and then provide us your comments.
Or if we did hold one in-person one, just to be able to say that we did allow people the opportunity, would it be up north?
So initially we discussed, whenever we first did this years ago, it feels like, we were talking about doing one in Chicago, one in Springfield, and one maybe down in Carbondale. I guess the question would be, would we look to hold one and, whether it be here in the DNR headquarters or one of the state agencies here in Springfield, or hold one up in the Chicago area where we think we get the most participation? Would be viewed upon negatively to go up to Chicago and only hold one up there.
It would
Yeah,
be.
I think probably politically need to have something in the middle part of the state, which would mean Springfield, I think. So if you just had one.
There's been multiple times where Laura and I have been requested to give a talk on the update or on the state water plan. I guess we could always entertain if that request came about to go up to Chicago to discuss it to a group. We could evaluate that option. But my concern is the perception of, hey, you're only catering to Chicago with this plan if we only present in public up there. Anybody, any thoughts?
Well, given what we're trying to do, for the use, I guess I'm leaning back to the 3 in person, and maybe it's just understanding that all topic leads can't be at all 3 necessarily, but we have a contingent that covers a northern, central, and southern in that outreach fashion. Here it is, and that we make that you could phone in as well to that any of those 3 days, and just kind of do that presentation as that kickoff. I think that'd be my suggestion. So we can certainly provide, the report out as we have already on the website and get the word out. Hey, we're going to have these 3 presentations in northern, central, and southern Illinois to go over the draft, and you can call in and participate virtually in that manner to that meeting, and and then provide comments by this date.
Lauren, I got a feeling we have a lot of individuals that may not have a preference. Does anybody have a strong preference one way or another, or strong feeling one way or another on this? I anticipate that it'd probably be only a few of us actually traveling for these, particularly the outside Springfield area presentation. So I guess I'm seeing if anybody has a strong feeling one way or another, if there's a benefit to going outside of Springfield or not.
No strong opinion.
I think we have to demonstrate that we made a valiant effort, and so that's what I'm saying. I think maybe the 3 in person are the way to go, with the opportunity to call in, so that you don't have to necessarily travel. We're not only offering in person, but we'd have three separate dates, 3 separate locations, and so even maybe if you're in Carbondale and you can only participate, your schedule only allows you to participate in the one we hold in Bartlett. Well, then you call in on that date and time, and you participate in that one via the phone.
I appreciate that flexibility. That sounds a neat idea.
And you're right, we just set those dates, and as team leads are able and it works on their schedule, if you can attend, great. But like you said, it'd probably be a contingent of us, and we can figure out what that contingent is for the 3 separate meetings, and do that kind of a presentation of how to use, here's the plan, here's when we went comments, here's, what's in it generally, and here's how the state water plan will, or how the state water plan task force will function based on this plan, and here's how you can engage with the task force as we go forward. And it kind of, it's obviously based on the plan, but I guess it takes it takes some of the spotlight off the detailed nitty gritty of the plan and gets more right into moving forward with the implementation of it. If somebody has a nitty gritty problem with it, they certainly will have the draft in hand, and we will certainly, as a task force, accept their comments and insights until a certain date after our outreach sessions.
I guess hearing no objections, we'll move forward with 3 public outreach, 1 in Chicago, 1 in Springfield, and 1 in Southern Illinois.
And we, I guess, as chair, we can take the lead on trying to come up with some venues and check availability and some dates here in June and early July, and bring that back to the task force. If anybody on the task force has recommendations or insights as to where it would be good to do that, then we can certainly chase that as well.
Lauren, I know we talked about DNR hosting Springfield. We looked to CMAP, and CMAP was willing to host a Chicago meeting. I forget who we were thinking about for down south. I believe we were looking in the Carbondale area, but I forget who our contact was that we were looking at coordinating with down there. I'd have to go back through my file.
Probably IDOT jumps to mind first. They've got a district office right there in Carbondale.
Very good.
BJ's not on to defend, so.
We'll put BJ in charge of coordinating that.
Yeah. Or, yeah, whether it's in Carbondale or, it may be the district in Collinsville, if we want to focus that area.
Well, I think we'll look at that and start moving forward on coordinating those. The tough thing, and maybe this is a good time to segue to the schedule and talk about when these public outreaches can be in light of what we still need to accomplish. So as Tara mentioned earlier, I think it's critical that we make sure we get these topic sections in. We don't want to have to hold up the plan just because we're missing a section or two. So please make sure you get those into us as soon as possible. It's going to take quite a bit of work on our end to kind of get those all sounding like one report, making sure that all the criteria is met and that they kind of look and sound similar to each other. As mentioned before, we were looking at getting that all in a couple of weeks ago. So going ahead, please make sure you get your sections in if you have not done so. For those of you that may have submitted your section, make sure and double check that your table is in the correct format as we've kind of discussed before. Make sure that you have submitted those cross-cutting topics as well. I see Tara's emphasizing the 1984 report comparison, so I think we've requested that. With that, I guess moving forward, we're looking at compiling the report by mid-May and essentially having that available for our internal reviews. So that is going to come upon us quickly, and we got a lot of work to do between now and then. So please, to help keep things moving along, make sure you get us the information so that we can hit these timelines. So mid-May, I think we're looking at having a final draft, so to speak, have that for review, and we'll probably have a couple weeks for internal review and comment on that. That would probably be a good time to maybe have our next task force meeting is after we've had a chance to review that and provide some comments. I guess I'll throw that for a future discussion later on, is when we'll have our next meeting. But essentially have that public or that internal comment period or review period for us in late May, which would allow us for a, I'll say probably mid-June for the public outreach, mid to late June. And then
if we had a draft by mid-May, and then gave everybody basically 1 month, the mid-June to do that, or maybe we look at like Monday the 13th of June, having a final powwow with the State Water Plant Task Force meeting at this time, and then we're setting up our outreach meetings or wrapping up details of our outreach for, say, the last those last 2 weeks of June.
So, Lauren, if we have our State Water Plan Task Force, let's just say the 13th, that will only give us 1 week to make any revisions, prepare presentations, things of that nature. It can be done. It'll just be a tight schedule if that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, or give ourselves 2 weeks and not hold the outreach until that last week of June.
Yeah, I think we'll also have to check schedules of individuals that we know need to be there and make sure that works out for them.
Yes.
So that's what we'll kind of shoot for now at this time, is that, hopefully within this week we'll have everybody sectioned in. We'll work on compiling the final report. I hope to get that to everybody mid-May or even earlier if possible. We'll see. And then we will look to have a meeting in Lauren kind of mentioned mid to early June. Lauren, do we want to set that date now?
I guess my preference would be to set it now. Any objections to the 13th? The 20th is a state holiday, the following Monday, so.
How about May 6th, just to get our meeting done and planning underway? I feel like 3 weeks is probably good. If we give everyone a month, they're just going to read it the last 2 days anyway.
Well, we won't have the report by May 6th, correct?
I'm sorry, I thought we were talking a June meeting. Are you talking to have a May meeting?
Well, I thought you said May. Maybe I misheard. I didn't know if you're proposing having a meeting before then. It may have been my confusion. Sorry if you were meaning June 6th. that's fine too.
Yeah, I think I meant June 6th, just to give us more time to plan. And I know July is going to be a tough month for public meeting with the 4th of July and things like that. I felt like we definitely want to have the public meeting the last 2 weeks of June if possible, and that gives us 2 weeks to plan.
I'm okay with June 6th if Mr. Couture is planning to work that day.
I got a feeling I'll be in the office. I'll have a lot of last minute things to do.
Well, let's set
Yeah,
it.
it may take it may take D-Day to a new meeting. Anybody opposed to the 6th?
Preferably in the morning if that's an option. I've got a conflict in the afternoon.
This time seems to work well for most.
June 6th, 9 to 11 or 12, whenever we wrap up. Any objections? Hearing none, we'll have the next meeting on June 6th we'll time slot 9 to 12, but I anticipate we'll probably get done before then, probably more like 9 to 11, but we'll send out for the meeting for 9 to 12. Lauren, I assume we're going to stay virtual or not have an in-person option. We'll just kind of continue in this format. It seems like we get good participation that way, unless there is interest for anyone to make a trip over to DNR. Any thoughts on the group on restoring that in-person meeting function?
This is Yvonne. Lauren, do you need to travel to Green Bay on the 6th?
I'm traveling to Green Bay the early in the morning of the 7th. I'm going to Peoria late that night.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Just to make sure there's no conflict on your schedule.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
In person be nice, but I kind of agree we've been able to get good participation by virtual. And if we do in person on the 6th, coming in from Champaign for 9 o'clock might be.
Yeah, I think we shift to 10 o'clock whenever we've done in person, but we've done 9 o'clock when we do virtual, knowing that there's a few coming over from Champaign.
And I did just attend a semi-personal, semi-virtual meeting at DNR. It might have only been a week ago, I don't know. And it was pretty much a disaster because the Wi-Fi or the communication wasn't allowing the people in the room to actually interact with the people virtually. So whatever you decide, you don't use the director's office conference room up there because I don't think it's set up to talk outside the building anymore, just so you know.
Amen. Let's plan to do it virtual.
Okay. Very good. Next meeting, June 6th, 9 to noon virtually.
Would have been better if you started at 6 a.m., so it would have been the 6th of the 6th month at the 6th hour. Just saying.
Yep. See, you can go right on ahead with the 6 o'clock Monday morning meeting.
I might
catch up with
consider
you
it 6 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll get the same quality of work out of me 6 a.m., 6 p.m., whatever.
I had a quick question just for the participants. The number that ends in 40, who would that be?
That's Jeff Edstrom.
Thanks, Jeff. And then C2? Okay, Wes, I'll figure it out later. Thanks.
Okay. Looking at the agenda, we've already covered the public meeting, the review of the schedule, discussion next step, and the next meeting has kind of been done at that regards, and we have discussed the future meeting date. So I guess I'll open it up if there's any general questions, comments that anybody would like to bring up to the group. Hearing none, I will turn back to you, Lauren, to wrap up the meeting.
Yeah, well, not being cognizant of everybody's time, thanks for your engagement on the path forward. Again, as Wes said, get sections in if you don't have that, or if there's any tweaks to that, and get the cross-cutting issues into Tara as well. And I'm speaking to myself as well, as I need to accomplish that. So thank you, everybody. If something comes up, shoot an email or get a hold of Tara, Wes, or I, and we'll get it back out to the group. So appreciate everybody's continued endeavors to push forward on this. Wes and I continue to talk about, well, do we give ourselves more time? But I know on my own calendar, there is no golden window of opportunity. So that's why I think we just kind of press forward and keep the heat on ourselves, and it will be what it'll be. And we just need to get to putting a bow on it here. So thank you, everybody, for your engagement. And I think with that, we can conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you.